Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, IHSS Changes the Next Step. I'm Justin Garrett, Legislative Representative for the California State Association of Counties, joined here by Eileen Cubanski, Senior Policy and Fiscal Analyst for the County Welfare Directors Association. This is part of our series of ongoing trainings on IHSS. Following last year's 2017-18 budget legislation, there were significant changes to the IHSS fiscal structure. And so kind of at key moments throughout this first year of implementation, CSAC has hosted either a webinar or in-person trainings in order to provide significant changes or significant updates and training when there have been significant changes in the implementation and new information coming out. And so this kind of goes into that ongoing series. Today we're going to cover a few topics that result from recent changes, as well as previewing a little bit what's to come when we get to the May revise. So as a little reminder of where we've been so far this year, we had our first training webinar in September, and at that point we covered the new county MOE that began on July 1st, and we talked through the methodology of how that was decided, what the county amounts were. And then we hosted an in-person training in November that covered a lot of the other implementation pieces that were final by that point. So the redirected mental health and health growth to social services, as well as the beginning of accelerated caseload growth, as well as spending a fair amount of time on the new wage and bargaining provisions. And so this training today is really about what has happened since that November training. And there's two key things. The first is updated revenue estimates in the governor's January budget proposal, and so what that means for some of our implementation efforts. And then secondly, there was another mid-year budget cleanup legislation that included some changes to the wage and bargaining provisions. So we're going to cover those two key topics on today's webinar. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the meat of our agenda. First up, we're going to talk about some changes to the MOE and the offsetting revenue, and Eileen's going to first talk about what was included in the governor's January budget.
In January, there were a couple of significant estimates that were updated, one of which is going to only be changing this year, and that's related to services costs for 2017-18 for IHSS. In January, the administration estimated that those costs are actually going to be lower for 2017-18 than they had originally thought at the final budget last year. And what that means is that per the IHSS MOE statutes, the 2017-18 base MOE amount can drop. The Department of Finance and Department of Social Services are estimating that'll come down by about $29 million. Now that number is not final, that is their preliminary estimate. And in addition to that, 1991 realignment sales tax revenues were also updated. And there was an increase in the estimated amount of growth that's going to be available from that funding source. It grew from $58.6 million to an estimated $166.9 million. So we have a combination of potentially dropping 2017-18 services costs in IHSS and increasing revenues, which is definitely a positive situation for us.
Great, thanks Eileen. So now let's shift our attention to what this means for accelerated caseload growth, and we'll do a quick reminder about a quick recap of what accelerated caseload growth is before we get into the changes. So prior to last year's budget legislation, sales tax base payments were made throughout the year. When each account's base was reached, the revenues were then held to the end of the realignment year and paid out through the existing growth formulas. What the change that was included is now IHSS caseload is accelerated into the current year. So this means projected sales tax revenues in the current year will be paid to counties throughout the current year instead of having to wait to the end of the realignment year to receive these revenues. And the purpose of this is to ensure that counties have enough revenues to manage these increased IHSS costs throughout the year, since there were significant cost increases. So only IHSS is accelerated. All the other social services programs continue on the normal 2-year caseload growth process. And any IHSS costs that are not covered by accelerated caseload growth will then also go into that normal caseload growth process. So this accelerated caseload growth is paid within the normal social services sales tax base payment. So it's not identified separately. It's not a separate amount. It's included in the base payments. And so what that means is that when the amount of revenue that's being paid in the base increases, the percent that each sub-account receives has to also change so that the health and all the other accounts receive the same amount, their percents go down, and the social services percent of the total base payment goes up because all of the new revenue that's coming in is accelerated caseload growth that's going to social services, and so those percentages have to match to make sure the right amounts are reached. And so you'll have noticed that this started in November, so that's when we were first able to implement the accelerated caseload growth. At that time, the estimate for 17-18 sales tax growth was $58.6 million. We worked with the Department of Finance and chose to accelerate the full amount at that time. And there was a couple of reasons behind that, but essentially we all knew that that revenue estimate was low based on, it wasn't adjusted after the final 16-17 revenues came in, which were higher than expected. And so we knew that when we got to January, that number was going to increase, so we felt comfortable being able to accelerate that whole amount and begin having that go out to counties. And so that amount was included in the November through February sales tax base payments. The county percent share that each county received of that amount was aligned with the offsetting revenue percent that each county had through the overall MOE methodology. So the same percent share that a county received for redirected VLF growth was used for this accelerated caseload growth that has been paid thus far. But now with the updated January budget proposal and new revised revenue estimates, we're able to make some changes to that, and that'll be reflected starting, and it has been reflected starting with the March payments. So we have a resource on this, our MOE and offsetting revenue implementation update, that covers a lot of the detail of how this will work. But essentially the new amount that will be accelerated total statewide is $114.1 million of the $166.9 million that's projected. And that amount includes the 58.6, so it's not, the 114 is not in addition to the 58.6, it's just increased to that amount. The remaining sales tax, so if that full 114 million is used and the full 166 million comes in as projected, that remaining amount will then go through the normal sales tax growth process. So first to any caseload that is owed from the prior 2 years, and then if both the accelerated amount is covered and the normal caseload growth amount is covered, there is the possibility of general growth for sales tax for 17-18, again, depending on how the revenues come in. So to get to that 114.1 million amount, we had to look at what each county had received thus far in offsetting revenue and how much they had remaining in existing increased IHS costs that had not yet been covered by that offsetting revenue. And so we looked at, what county's MOE increase was, how much they'd received in redirected growth, how much they received in state general fund, and then how much they'd received in accelerated caseload growth thus far through the 4 months that it had been paid. So looking at the percent share that each county had received of the growth and calculating the growth based on the percent that the social services base increased each month, we were able to do the calculations to figure out what had been paid out thus far. And then because there's this large increase in the projected revenue, and we looked at what each county still had in remaining costs, we were able to see that there is enough projected revenue to fully cover the increased costs for each county in this first year. And that's great news. And so the goal would be to maximize that amount, and so that's how that 114.1 million number was reached. A couple of notes about that number. For CMSP counties, CSAC secured a specific provision that they could carry over any of the redirected growth amount that was specifically from CMSP into future years when the IHS cost increase were going to be greater, to be able to manage those increased costs. And so this 114 million accelerates enough so that those 35 CMSP, those smaller counties, can be able to carry over that revenue into future years. That full amount of CMSP growth in this first year into future years when the cost increases will be more difficult to manage. And then another thing that's included and incorporated into the 114 million is the amount of the 400 million state general fund that have not yet been received by counties. So the first year, the 400 million state general fund contribution to help counties offset these increased IHS costs is made up of 3 components. There's a direct general fund amount that was incorporated into the services MOE billing. There's an amount, and that's about 370 million. There's an amount that's 16.9 million that was AB 85 family support VLF growth that was paid directly to counties in October. And then there's an amount that's 17-18 projected AB 85 family support growth, and the state is using those funds as part of the 400 million general fund contribution. However, since counties won't receive that revenue until fiscal year 18-19, that third component, we've incorporated that so that counties are receiving it through the accelerated caseload growth so that it is received in this first year when it should. And so that's how we arrive to what amount to accelerate for 17-18. And so with this, the county percent shares will adjust. So it won't be those exact same percent shares that were used in November through February, because now with the increased revenue, we're accelerating the amount to fully cover each county's IHS cost if at all possible. And so with the way the methodology works, every county doesn't need the exact same amount. And so it'll just be accelerated to cover what amount each county has in remaining costs, because a county cannot receive more in accelerated caseload growth than they have in increased IHS costs. It has to stop when it gets to zero, essentially, other than the CMSP counties, as I've talked about. And so, again, this began with the March payments. The benefits of this are that it maximizes the amount of revenues that can be provided to counties through accelerated caseload growth. And this is really positive news, because if revenues come in as projected, which is still a big part of this, we do need to wait and see what the revenues are. But if that does occur, then counties' increased IHS costs in this first year can be fully offset. It's very positive news, but always important to keep in mind those continuing out-year concerns. We know the cost increase is going to get more difficult in the years to come. And so this is great news for years one, but we know that there are continuing cost concerns in future years, and also want to acknowledge that a portion of the offsetting revenue is redirected growth that would have otherwise gone to counties for vital health and mental health programs. So that really kind of covers how we got to this new amount of accelerated caseload growth. But we want to ensure that counties have the tools in order to be able to track this and what each county is receiving moving forward. And so Eileen's going to walk us through how to do that.
Unfortunately, it's not as simple as just knowing what the annual amount is and dividing that by 12. The challenge is that revenues come in different amounts every month, and it varies from year to year. So you just don't know with certainty in advance how much of what comes in is going to be associated with accelerated caseload growth versus just your base. So we wanted to provide you some information on how to do that, and I won't step through every detail in these slides, but we did want to provide you the details so that you can know the steps that you would need to think about and work through to figure out your county's specific amount of accelerated caseload growth. But essentially what you need to do is figure out from the total amount of sales tax revenues that are received in a given month, how much of those statewide are associated with accelerated sales tax revenues, and then determine from that amount of accelerated sales tax revenues what your share of that is. And so these next couple of slides would help you figure that out. But essentially what you're going to need to know is the amount of sales tax revenues that's coming in any given month that would have otherwise come in as part of the base without the acceleration, the amount of sales tax revenues that come in the month with the acceleration, and the difference between those two is going to be the amount that is being accelerated for that particular month. And then that amount, after that, you'll need to know what your share is, your particular county share is of that amount. I would refer you right now to one of the handouts that says 2017-18 projected accelerated caseload growth. And this might provide a little bit of better visual about what it is that we're looking at here. There's a couple of columns or rows at the top rather that show the proportion of monthly sales tax revenues to the social services subaccount without the acceleration and with it. And if you took those percentages and multiplied them by the amount of total sales tax revenues in March, you would get the proportion that is associated with the accelerated. And then from there, if you look at the column, the third column there that says percent share of accelerated caseload growth beginning in March, you can find your county's percent, multiply that by that number, and then you've got what your share is of accelerated caseload growth that's coming into your subaccount for the month of March. So we can't unfortunately just provide you with a monthly number because again, the sales tax revenues vary. What I did want to point out on the chart, that the handout that we provided, what we did do was calculate the amount of accelerated sales tax growth that's already been received by county through February. And we had to do that, as Justin mentioned, for purposes of determining how much additional revenues would need to be accelerated by figuring out how much of the IHSS costs in 17-18 we'd already paid off. So we just simply provided you that data for ease of reference, since we already had to do that calculation. We haven't done it yet for March, and obviously we don't know what it's going to be for the rest of the year. So that's where you're going to have to do your own individual county calculation should you need to know those amounts. Overall, the estimated amount of accelerated growth, it's going to be re-estimated every January and every May. So as the Department of Finance updates their revenue estimates for 1991 realignment, they will have new sales tax growth projections, and so the amount that's accelerated is going to have to be looked at and potentially adjusted depending on whether those sales tax revenue projections go up or down. Because in any given year we may or may not have enough sales tax growth to fully cover the IHSS costs in that year. And what that means then is that likely every January and May, so starting in February and June, the distribution at the state level of sales tax revenues among the state level sub-accounts, as Justin described in his discussion, will have to change. And that also means, too, that the county's share of the accelerated revenues are likely going to have to change, because we're going to have to look at, okay, how much of each county's current year IHSS costs have we paid off up to January or up to May in the particular fiscal year, and determine how much is remaining to be paid off in order to calculate how much we need to do in accelerated growth, and then how much each county needs to cover their costs. So you can see this is going to get pretty complicated, and it's going to change with some frequency, a couple times a year. And so what I think we at CSAC are going to have to do is provide you the needed data at each point in time. That's not being published on the controller's website in any explicit fashion, and so we're going to have to provide you with the tools and the data that you're going to need to be able to do these calculations every month, and we'll be working to find a format that we can get you that information regularly.
All right, thanks, Eileen. So one last change kind of to realignment bases, and this is related to what's going on here, but to recap again on the state's $400 million general fund contribution, you know, they are paying $400 million to offset IHSS costs, but it's being paid through 3 different ways. And so there is the direct state general fund amount that has been paid and incorporated into the services MOE billing that began late last year. There's the amount that was received by counties in October as a growth payment from the AB 85 Family Support VLF account that was $16.9 million. And then there's that same growth for 17-18 that's currently projected and that will be received likely around next October. But on that $16.9 million amount, so it was received by counties, it was counted as part of the $400 million general fund contribution, but then under realignment, the family support account essentially zeroes out each year, and those revenues then would normally go back to the health and the CMSP bases, because that's where they were diverted from under AB 85. However, that $16.9 million was erroneously being included in the social services base, and the state was also considering that $16.9 million another contribution towards the $400 million. That's incorrect. That's not consistent with realignment statute, and so that's going to need to be fixed. And so that'll start in April. So in April, the April VLF base payments, this $16.9 million that was included in social services will now move to health and CMSP bases based on realignment statute and how it should work. An important note there then is that this $16.9 million that the state was considering an additional part of the $400 million contribution will now need to come directly from the state general fund. And so whenever the services MOE is next updated and the billing for that, it'll need to reflect this differing amount, and that more revenue for counties is actually going to be coming directly from the state general fund. So that's some changes that a little preview of what we're going to see in April on the VLF base side. Now there's actually a similar issue on the sales tax side with, again, this AB 85 family support amount. So on the sales tax side, the AB 85 family support amount was never intended or to be used for IHSS. So it was $6.2 million. It wasn't given to social services to offset IHSS costs as a growth payment. It was just used for the normal purposes of the family support account. However, again, when it was zeroed out and then added to a 17-18 sub-account base, it was put into social services, but that's also incorrect. It should have gone to health and CMSP, consistent with realignment statute. So starting in April, that $6.2 million will be moved from social services base to the health and CMSP base. Now the difference here is we never counted this $6.2 million as part of an IHSS offsetting revenue amount. So it's never been in any of our calculations that we've said, oh, this is $6.2 million that's helping to offset IHSS costs. So there's no changes that need to be made on that front. It just, you need to be aware that the health and CMSP bases as well as the social services base will be adjusted starting in April to move the $6.2 million over to where it should be for the 17-18 base. And so that essentially covers a lot of the changes we're seeing with realignment growth and bases as part of the MOE and offsetting revenue. So now we're going to shift gears and start talking about some of the collective bargaining provisions. So as you know, there is a lot of new tools for counties related to collective bargaining with IHSS providers. And I'm not going to cover all of those tools today. We did some extensive training on it in November. We just want to focus on what's different because of recent legislation, AB 110. But I would let you know that the resource we've included on this is our 7-page kind of overview that we did in partnership with CWDA as well as CAPA that covers kind of all of the big significant changes to collective bargaining and how those tools are going to be implemented. So all that information is there and available, but I'll just talk today about what was included in AB 110 and what that means. So there was some mid-year cleanup legislation, a little unusual to have some budget cleanup legislation this late in the budget year, but there are a couple issues, including this IHSS wage and bargaining provision that needed to be fixed urgently, and so that was included in AB 110. As we've been working with the Department of Finance, Department of Social Services, and counties have been communicating directly with them as well as they've been going through local collective bargaining, there's been some differing opinions on how the wage supplement would work and how it would be implemented. And so what this bill does is it resolves the issue of subsequent applications of the wage supplement. We are pleased with the outcome that's included in AB 110. It's consistent with CSAC's original understanding of how the wage supplement should work. It protects a pending local collective bargaining agreement, and it will help avoid future costs for counties that utilize the wage supplement. So let's talk a little bit about how that would work. We're going to walk through kind of the three main things that are in AB 110. So the first one isn't actually about the wage supplement, but it's kind of some overall state review, state approval language that was now included. The state felt that given the complexity of all these new collective bargaining tools, they really needed some extra language in there that acknowledged their process in reviewing whenever rate packages are submitted to them from counties for approval, that they need to review it for consistency with and compliance with state law. And so, I mean, I think it's probably pretty consistent with what they already did, but now it's specifically called out in statute that during their review of the rate increases that are submitted to them, they need to ensure that it is compliant with state law. So that's essentially what that provision does. And then the main provision, again, relates to the wage supplement. So a quick reminder first of what the wage supplement is. It's a specific amount that a county can negotiate with the local providers that is in addition to the county provider wage. And so there's a one-time MOE adjustment when the wage supplement is first negotiated and applied. And then every time the wage supplement is subsequently applied, there's no additional MOE adjustment. However, I would note that there is, of course, the annual inflator every year on the original MOE adjustment. The state participation in a wage supplement, similar to any wage increase, relates to where the county falls related to the state participation cap and what other tools they may be using to help secure additional state participation, such as the new 10% over 3 years provision that I won't cover in detail here, but that it is covered in the document. And just to clarify, you can use both the wage supplement and the 10% tool in conjunction in order to get state participation. So what AB 110 does is it clarifies that the wage supplement will be subsequently applied when state minimum wage equals or exceeds the county provider wage absent the wage supplement amount. So a quick example. If a county has a provider wage of $11.75 and does a 50-cent wage supplement, when minimum wage increases from $11 to $12, it passes the $11.75 amount, and so that 50 cents that was currently allowing the provider to be paid $12.25 would be added again on top of the new county provider wage of $12, and so that provider would now be paying $12.50, and there'd be no subsequent application or subsequent MOE adjustment for this additional application of the wage supplement. When minimum wage increases to $13, the 50 cents will be added again, and so on. And the difference is how the department was indicating this would have worked is when minimum wage went to $12, it would not have yet passed the $12.25 amount that was the county provider wage plus the wage supplement. So they were saying that it would have to wait until it went to $13 and pass the $12.25 amount for that 50 cents to be added again. So AB 110 clarifies it's when state minimum wage equals or exceeds the amount, the county provider wage absent the wage supplement amount. So this is positive news for counties, and this is how it will now work moving forward. So we've included several examples just kind of for counties at different wage ranges, showing several years out how the wage supplement will work. So first, for a county that's at minimum wage, essentially this can work to maintain a specific difference between the overall county wage and state minimum wage, just because that same amount is going to be added each time, and if you are only originally adding it to state minimum wage, it's going to maintain that same distance. That's not what the wage supplement does, but that is essentially how it works for a county that's at minimum wage. So you see here an example of a 50-cent wage supplement for a county that's at minimum wage, and essentially every year it'll increase and be added on and maintain a 50-cent amount over the state minimum wage. For a county that's above minimum wage and below the state participation cap, we show an example here for a county that's say at $11.60, does a 50-cent supplement. The wage increases to $12.10 during the year that the state minimum wage is $11. So at that point, it's $1.10 above the minimum wage. But then when state minimum wage goes to $12, it passes the $11.60 amount. The 50 cents is added to the $12, and so the new wage is now $12.50. So it's not maintaining that $1.10 difference, but it does add that 50 cents again to the new wage, and you'll see that carried out kind of through the subsequent years as well. And then finally, we show an example for a county that's well above the state participation cap. Again, it works the same way. I think what you would notice for those counties is that it's going to take a little longer for subsequent applications of the wage supplement. So you have to wait a little longer for state minimum wage to catch up with the county wage. But again, better than under the differing opinion of how this would have worked. And there are still benefits for counties in this range in terms of getting that additional supplement amount without a subsequent MOE adjustment. And so this really covers how the wage supplement will work. And now I'll turn it over to Eileen to talk about one last part of AB 110.
Right, there was an additional kind of provision added in 110 related to the wage supplement, and we refer to it as the highest wage paid provision. What it did was specify that if a county wanted to provide a wage supplement, that would have to be added to the highest wage paid in the county as of June 30th, 2017. This issue came up before AB 110 was enacted, and there was a little bit less clarity about how the wage supplement was to operate and when subsequent applications of that wage supplement would be. And what happened was counties can shift between wages and health benefits within their current approved rate. And what one county had done was shifted a portion of their wages over to their health benefit, and did all that within their current approved rate, so there was no net cost, and then provided a wage supplement on top of that lower wage, thereby bringing the wage back up to its previous level. The county paid for that supplement as is required by law, so it wasn't that there were fewer costs to the county of doing that adjustment. But what does happen when that occurs is that the costs to the state are longer over the long run as the minimum wage goes up. So the state was concerned about that additional cost potential. And so this additional provision was added in 110, which now says that if you want to provide a wage supplement, it has to be on top of that highest wage paid as of June 30th, 2017. You can still move funding between wages and benefits within your current approved rate, but you cannot then put a supplement on top of the wage if the wage is lower than it was in June 30th. That supplement can't be applied until your wage is back up to whatever it was as of June 30th, 2017. There's an exemption in AB 110 for the county that did make that adjustment. The county did so on advice of the state. So they had finished their negotiations and submitted their rate package to the state before AB 110, and they're exempted from this particular change because of the guidance they've been given from the state and the timing of their change. But that is a new provision, and it is something to keep in mind as you're thinking about your negotiations and providing a supplement. So now we're going to turn it back over to Justin and look at what to expect next at the May revision.
Yep, excellent. Just a final note on the collective bargaining. I believe the state has now put out their official CFL on how this will work as well, and we maintain and will continue to participate in ongoing conversations for the more detailed calculations because we know that's important information that counties need as well. Okay, so a little preview of what's to come in May, because a lot of what we just covered, and especially some of the specific numbers, are going to need to be adjusted again, as Eileen had already alluded to, when we get to the May revise. So the governor's May revision proposal will include an estimated update on 2017 IHSS costs. And so based on a provision that CSAC secured in last year's budget legislation, if these services costs are less than what was in the final enacted budget, then the MOE will be adjusted down at that point. So again, in the January proposal, it was $29 million lower than what was in the last year's final enacted budget. And so if that same amount is there in May, or a slightly different amount, as long as it's lower than the final budget, there's no way for the cost to adjust upward, then the MOE will need to be adjusted at that point, and there will be lower county costs in 17-18 for IHSS, and then the annual inflator that's applied to that amount will be slightly lower each year as well, based on having lower costs in 17-18. And so we'll wait to see what's in the May revise, but at that time, that is when we would expect the Department of Social Services to actually make an MOE adjustment at that point. And Eileen will walk us through accelerated.
And then in May revision, the estimate of accelerated caseload growth is also going to change. Realignment, 1991 realignment sales tax revenues will be updated, and that will lead to a changed estimate of the total amount of growth. So what we'll need to look at is, do we still need $114 million in accelerated caseload growth to cover all the IHSS costs, because IHSS costs may be declining, as Justin mentioned, but also what do the growth revenues look like, and are they still sufficient to cover that full $114 million or whatever it is, or are they more, are they less? And all of that will again be updated at the May revision. And so that will lead to changes in those growth estimates as well.
All right, so that covers our presentation portion of this webinar. So we'll now turn our attention to the questions that have come in. So do feel free to type them in, and we've got some time remaining, so we'll go ahead and start answering those questions. So the first one is asking about, with these lower IHSS costs and higher revenue amounts, what does this mean in terms of health and mental health growth? Are they still not going to receive any growth this year? So on the VLF side, for health and mental health growth, it's a set amount that will be redirected each year. So 100% of that growth is redirected for 3 years, and then 50% of that growth is redirected for the next 2 years, and then no growth is redirected after that. So that's kind of a set amount that's already occurred, and so there won't be any changes on the VLF side based on the updated revenue estimates that have come in. On the sales tax side, so the 16-17 growth was redirected, but if we get to a point where there is 17-18 general growth, it would not be redirected. So there remains a possibility of general growth for health and mental health this year, and how that would occur is, we would accelerate the projected sales tax growth to the full amount that is needed to cover IHSS costs. If there's still sales tax growth after that, that amount of revenue would go into the general growth formulas, or it would follow realignment statute, so it would first be used for caseload growth. So any of the 2-year cycle of social services caseload growth programs, whatever amount that is, would be paid first by the remaining sales tax growth. And if that is fully paid, and then there is still sales tax growth after that, that would then go into general growth. And so that would, follow the formulas that exist today, and so go a certain amount to health, mental health, family support, all the different accounts. So it's possible. It'll completely depend on what the revenues actually come in this first year. Looking ahead to future years, I think it's more unlikely that would occur, especially as we get to 2 years when there's not going to be enough offsetting revenue to fully cover IHSS costs. So possible for year 1, unlikely after that, in terms of some general growth for health and mental health. Anything to add on that?
Nope, that was
All right. You want to take
Sure.
question 2?
So the next question is why the statewide accelerated amount paid through February on the worksheet isn't $58 million, which is a good question. That's because we haven't gotten our way all the way through the realignment fiscal year yet. If there had been no changes to the revenue estimates and no changes to the assumptions of IHSS costs that we need to still fund due to the increased revenues received on sales tax and VLF for 2016-17, we would have expected these monthly accelerated payments to continue until at the end of the realignment fiscal year, which is August. It would equal $58 million. So there are only in this $10 million figure that's on the handout, there's accelerated growth for December, January, November, December, January, and February. So this only reflects actually 4 months of accelerated growth, and so we hadn't gotten through the whole year. We didn't get to the 58 million. Theoretically, if everything continues to hold throughout the rest of the fiscal year, the amount of accelerated growth revenue, the proportion of it is going to increase starting in March, such that by the end of the realignment fiscal year, we're going to hit that total $114 million figure by the end of that year.
All right, so next question is, how would the wage supplement work if the wage supplement amount is increased this year? So an example, if 50 cents in year 1 and then 75 cents, does that in year 2, does that additional 25 cents affect the MOE? Yes, it would. So essentially they'd be 2 individual wage supplements. So you'd have a 50-cent wage supplement. When that's first negotiated and applied, there'd be the MOE adjustment, and that 50 cents would keep subsequently applying at those points when state minimum wage equals or passes it, as we kind of talked about how that would work today. If you wanted to then increase the wage supplement to 75 cents, you'd have to do it as a separate wage supplement of 25 cents, and there would be an MOE adjustment for that 25 cents. But then again, that 25 cents would continue to be added on subsequently in the same way that the 50 cents would be. So yes, there would be an MOE adjustment because it would be a separate wage supplement amount, and that's how it would work.
The next question is, how will counties receive the IHSS admin and CMIP state general fund offset? Only the services portion of the state general fund offset is reduced on the IHSS MOE monthly invoice. We didn't talk about administration in this particular presentation since we're focused on the accelerated revenue. I will just note before answering the question that those estimates of how much state general fund is to be provided for IHSS administration, both county and public authority, was updated in January, and it's going to be updated again in May. And we at CWDA and CAPA and CSAC have been doing a lot of work with the administration on those figures, and are looking to increase the amount of general fund that's available for administrative activities. But in the meantime, we are waiting to see what's going to come out in the May revision. Jeff, can you scroll back to the question? I'm sorry. So for the administration and the CMIPS piece, they're going to be treated differently. IHSS administration is still to be claimed, as it always was, on the county expense claim. And within that claim, they're going to be doing shifts between state general fund and county general fund. The state is going to be doing these things. That's going to ensure that a county hits its MOE amount, and if it exceeds it, that it will shift to county or to county only funds. Or actually, let me take that back. It will ensure the county hits its county share of the MOE, and it will also ensure that the county, if it has enough expenditures, will draw down enough general fund, and then if the combined total expenditures is greater than those two pieces, it will shift to county only funds. The amount in the claim that shows up as the county's MOE share is net of that general fund piece. So you are getting that deduction already on the front end in the claim. So your MOE is going to be lower. As the general fund amount goes down, that amount in the claim that is your MOE share for admin will go up, both for the inflation factor and to reflect the fact that there is less general fund offset to offset those costs. So it's being handled, I guess you could say, on the back end, and it's kind of invisible to you when you're submitting your claim and when you see it in the claim. I'm sorry, Justin. The CMIPS is a little bit different. That you're going to be billed for if it hasn't already started already, and the bill that you receive for the CMIPS portion will be net of the general fund offset, just like it is on the services side.
All right, next question is, can we follow up with the answers to these questions in writing? We can see what we can put together. I would just encourage you, if there's a specific question that you really want to get the answer to, just feel free to email us directly. It is the best way to make sure we get you the information you need, but we'll see what we can put together on that front.
Will this change or help the 26% gap in the public authority funding? Yes, we are hopeful that the conversations that we're having with the administration now about administration and public authority administration costs is going to improve that 26% gap. We know that the budget that the administration released in January wasn't complete in terms of the methodology and the budgeting for administration. We've identified some areas there where we think they underestimated the costs, and we know and they acknowledge that they didn't build in all of the known workload in IHSS and Public Authority Administration. So we're hopeful that the May revision is going to reflect those higher costs and that additional workload as funded, and that will result in additional funding for county and Public Authority Administration that helps mitigate some of that reduction.
Next question is regarding the reopener language, and when will it begin, and what are there any expectations as to the outcome? So a great question. We really wanted to focus this webinar on kind of some of the specific 17-18 implementation updates, but I'll certainly kind of address the bigger picture because we know there's a lot of interest in that as well. So the reopener provision is the requirement that was in last year's budget legislation that requires the administration to consult with CSAC and other affected stakeholders in the development of the 1920 budget and to issue a report with findings and recommendations in January 2019 on 4 specific elements. So on overall 1991 realignment funding, and if there's enough to cover the programs that counties are administering on behalf of the state, on IHSS cost growth and how that's growing compared to the inflator, on the impact on health, mental health, and other social services program and CMSP with the redirected growth, and on the status of collective bargaining for IHSS. So CSAC is making this a top priority to work towards that reopener. We know that 1920 is when the overall cost shift becomes more difficult for counties to manage, and that is the reason we secured this provision, is so that we had a specific requirement that this new IHSS fiscal structure would be revisited at that time. We've developed a working group. We're beginning our conversations about what counties need on this front to really analyze the different options and ensure that counties are coming to this reopener conversation with specific recommendations about what counties need long-term in order to have a sustainable IHSS structure and be able to successfully administer these programs on behalf of the state. Any kind of specific conversations with the administration will likely occur after the 18-19 budget is kind of put to rest in June. But we are maintaining this as a priority. We've sent a letter to highlight the importance of this reopener provision and our continued work in partnership with all of our county affiliates so that the legislature and the governor's administration are aware that this remains a top priority for us looking ahead to 1920.
Will the IHSS admin cap be adjusted for the workload growth formula is the next question. And the answer is yes. The IHSS admin cap is a combination of two things. It's a combination of the county's IHSS admin MOE, the portion of the MOE that's associated with admin, and the state general fund allocation that the county receives. And it's the sum of those two things that's called the capped funding, because once a county spends above that amount, that funds become county-only funds, and they don't count towards your MOE. So as the administration revises its workload growth formula, it's doing so with an eye towards, or from our perspective, with an eye towards putting more general fund in to cover the unfunded costs. The MOE portion of the admin cap is basically fixed though, so that's based on the 17-18 costs, and it will be of course inflated every year by 5%, but that's already a known amount. It's the state general fund that we are advocating for to fund the workload that's not yet included and the costs that are not yet included that will go up in the May revision if the administration is going to accurately budget for IHSS. So yes, the overall amount available for administration, and so the overall cap will increase.
And just looking at the time, we are over 10:45, but we have lots of good questions here, so we're going to hang on for a couple more minutes and continue answering these questions. So the next question is the percent share on the 2017-18 projected accelerated caseload growth. Does that reflect the percent that each county received prior to March, or does it reflect the adjusted percentage? So great question. So prior to March, every county's percent share, so prior to March, it was the offsetting revenue percent, so it is not that percent that's shown there. It is the percent shares that we shared at our November training and likely earlier than that, and that was the amount that was used for the November through February payments. That was also the same as what was used for redirected growth. And so instead of showing a percent there, we showed the actual amount of accelerated caseload growth that each county has received. The percent that's there is the amount that each county will receive from March through the end of the year. So essentially of the 104 million accelerated caseload growth that remains to be paid, this is the percent share that each county will receive of that remaining amount. So as Eileen walked through kind of how to figure that out, starting with the March, how much your county received, that's the percent share you're going to want to use there to figure that out. I'm going to take the next one, because I think the next two are more for you.
Yep.
So is the initial wage supplement amount maxed at 50 cents, or can the wage supplement be higher or lower? It does not have to be 50 cents. A wage supplement can be any amount. You just have to keep in mind that there will be an MOE adjustment for the county share of the cost for whatever the wage supplement amount is. But no, it does not have to be 50 cents.
The next question is whether IHSS admin will still be billed separately from the IHSS services. And the answer is yes, they are separate. Although IHSS services are being billed, IHSS administration is being handled within the existing county expense claim. So you're not receiving a bill for that. Counties are claiming expenditures as they always have, and dollars are being shifted within that claim to ensure that you're both maximizing the state general fund but also fully paying the county MOE. So they are being handled differently, and the admin funds are not included in the IHSS services bill. In fact, those bills should already have been adjusted to exclude those. So the billing at the beginning of the year started out kind of with everything, and since the MOE numbers have been nailed down more firmly for 2017-18 and the claim process for administration has been solidified, those billings should have been corrected to both update the MOE billing on the services side for the new 17-18 amounts, as well as to ensure that they're not billing you also for the administration portion. And then the next question is the public authority claim going to be changed to reflect the MOE changes and county share that shows up on it? And this is a good question, and unfortunately I don't know the answer to this specifically. The public authority claim is going through a lot of changes, and that's something that I know CAPA has been working closely with the administration on. And my initial sense is yes, it's going to need to be, but it is not my area of expertise, and so we'll have to provide you more information on that as we figure that out.
All right, next question. If the MOE is adjusted based on each new wage supplement, will the net increase in MOE be more, less, or the same if the supplement is done in one go or multiple times? So kind of depends on if it's done in different fiscal years. So the formula for figuring out the MOE adjustment is final 17-18 hours multiplied by any inflation factor up to that point multiplied by the county share of costs. So if you do two separate wage supplements and you're in the same fiscal year, so say you're still both in 17-18, you know, the cost of the two separate supplements would be the same as if it was done at one time. But if you do one in 17-18 and one in 18-19, when you have the MOE adjustment in 18-19, it's multiplied by 17-18 hours times the 5% inflation factor, then times the county share of costs. So it would be a little higher MOE adjustment if you did it in a later fiscal year. Is that accurate? Okay.
I think that's right.
All right.
The next question is whether the May revision is going to reflect IHSS administration and public authority administration state general fund increases for both 17-18 and 2018-19 if there's an increase in the state general fund. And the answer is that no, there will only be an increase in the budget year that we're working on. We are not anticipating, although I guess we could be surprised, but we're not anticipating any changes to 2017-18 to the current year in the state general fund that's provided. It would be prospective if it occurs starting in 2018-19.
All right, next question. In the past, we had adjustments to wages mid-year, but the MOE was annualized for the current fiscal year. The recent CFL indicates that adjustments will be prorated for the current fiscal year and then annualized for future fiscal years. Has this changed as statute language remains consistent?
I think this is more of a semantics issue. The adjustment will be the same. In the first year, it's prorated for the length of time that the wage increase is going to be in effect, and then it's fully annualized beginning in the next year, the first full 12 months. That's how it operated under the old NMOE, and that's how it will be operating under the new MOE as well. And I think they've changed their language a little bit in how they describe it, but it's the same process.
All right, next question relates to the out-year projections CSAC produced in terms of IHS costs and offsetting revenue. And are those projections assuming current growth increase levels of realignment? So any projections that CSAC puts out for future years, we use the revenue estimates that are provided by the Department of Finance. So what they're currently estimating for growth for 1991 realignment is what we would plug in to determine what the potential amount of increased IHS costs that are not covered in future years would be. So we were using the projections from the Department of Finance on that.
The next question is it true that the IHSS Services General Fund offset will be decreased as well as the Services MOE will increase by 7%? Yes, although I will note that in the first year the inflation factor is 5% and not 7%, but yes, the General Fund offset is going to go down and the inflator is going to be applied and go up. Excuse me. I think that's it.
So are you saying the 400 million would go down? Or is that?
Yes, the 400 million is being reduced. I'm sorry. Frog in my throat.
Sorry,
It's going down from 400 million to 330 million.
Oh, I see.
I think that's the question. And the inflator of 5% is going to be applied. So the upshot is you're going to have increased costs and less general fund to offset those costs.
Yep, okay, sorry. Thanks.
I think that's the question.
I thought I might have been asking about in this first year if the services MOE goes down, but I do see that what you're answering, so I was confused, so my own fault. All right, next question. Has the state determined how they will handle adjustments for those counties that will not meet the MOE admin costs through the CEC?
Yes.
You take that one.
Yeah, they have. They're going to bill you more on the services side to make up for that, and they will make that billing in the next fiscal year once they have reconciled how much on the administrative side you are short.
All right, and maybe we'll do one last question. Two last questions. Okay. Okay. Can you share what factors will be considered toward the revised methodology used to distribute IHS admin funding among the 58 counties in fiscal year 18-19 and onwards?
No, we can't at this time because we don't yet know how that allocation methodology will change. I think it's going to depend on how they update the budget methodology, and we'll have to have conversations with all the counties and within CSAC to figure out that distribution. But that will definitely be updated once we have more information from the May revision and into the final budget over the summer.
Okay, next question. If the wage supplement, is my understanding correct, that if the wage supplement is higher in the beginning year, better on MOE adjustment rather than increasing more over time? Well, that's kind of going to depend on your local county situation. I mean, if you're looking at how much the MOE adjustment will cost, certainly the earlier you do an amount, the lower the MOE adjustment will be initially, but the inflator will still apply to that amount every year, so it could almost get you to the same point as if you did it later. And then you also need to understand kind of what your county could afford initially versus being able to spread out over multiple years. So there's kind of a lot of factors that would be involved in that, but certainly the initial adjustment would be lower because you wouldn't have the inflators that have occurred to that point involved in that formula yet. Does that kind of cover that?
That's right.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we're going to stop here. We appreciate all those great questions, and I would just say overall, partnership with counties on implementing this and all of your questions and really your guidance and expertise has been extremely helpful for the work that we do at the state level. So we appreciate that. Please keep those questions coming as we continue working on this. We really appreciate you joining us for today's webinar, and really appreciate Eileen partnering with us on this and sharing her expertise as well. You can feel free to follow up with us directly with any questions. My email is jgarrett, that's 2 R's and 2 T's, @counties.org.
And mine is Cubanski, Cubanski @CWDA.org.
And again, thank you for joining us today for the webinar.